following your passion, a six-figure, maybe even seven-figure income, or a plush corner office? These are just a few of the common responses that get rattled off when people start to describe what they perceive to be a fulfilling career. But are they really the key to achieving it? Well, I'm Christopher Lind, and I'm professionally a tech analyst, an industry advisor, and an HR executive. On the personal front, I'm a husband and father of seven. But wherever you encounter me, you'll find that I'm living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. And this is a question that I'm going to be covering today. So if you came here looking for the universal answer or the easy button to a fulfilling career, your response to this video may vary. In some ways, there is an underlying consistency for everyone out there that I'm hoping to hit on today and make the case for. However, I'll be completely honest, what this looks like in practice should actually look different for every single person. And after all, when you think about it, we're all different. So to think that your journey looks exactly like someone else's is just not realistic, but we'll get into that. Also, like anything, good things are hard work. Going back to the easy button thing. So while there are easier paths, and I'm hoping this video will help you find an easier path to career fulfillment, you ultimately are still going to have to climb that mountain. No video you watch, no coach you get, nobody can just have you get to the top without the hard work. So I will leave it at that. But when I say, what is this unexpected secret to career fulfillment? Well, the easy or the quick answer to that is being known. Now, let me just say, if that is not what you expected, well, that was intentional because that's the thumbnail, obviously. But I think it's important to understand what I mean by being known, because I'm not talking about finding a job somewhere where everyone knows all of your deepest secrets and your inner thoughts, and every single minute of your work life satisfies all your inner desires. It's not that. What I just painted there is not realistic for anyone. So if that's what you're shooting for, it's like chasing the wind. You're never going to get there. But on top of it, if you really think about that, I don't know that anybody really would want that anyway. That would almost be exhausting and too much. What I'm talking about is being able to walk this narrow path where the environment and you are mutually adapting to each other, and where the people you're working with know who you are and what you bring to the situation, so that you're able to bring the best version of yourself into whatever it is you're doing, and then also be appreciated for it. Now, if you're intrigued, I hope you are. Well, let me just say, I hope so, because based on workplace statistics, this seems to be a huge opportunity area in a number of different companies. And just anecdotally, in the conversations I have with people, this is not something where when I talk to people and I describe what I just described, like, do you feel this way about the work you do? Very few people I encounter say, yes, I absolutely do. And I feel fulfilled in that. Now, let me be clear on this, though. This is different than a lot of the career advice that's out there. What I'm talking about is actually flipping the script to a lot of traditional advice, in that I'm going to hopefully encourage you to find fulfillment in your situation instead of constantly being on the lookout for this mythical quest to find this destination that you arrive to that, quite frankly, just doesn't exist. Now, does that mean that if you watch this or you learn from my perspective on this, I'm going to say, no matter where you are, you should just stay there the rest of your life? That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, hopefully, as you go through this, you'll see that wherever you are, you can have that fulfillment where you are. And ideally, you should be pursuing that. And ultimately, yeah, that may still lead to new adventures, but that's not your driving force. In short, rather than looking for a job that's going to fulfill you, I hope to encourage you to behave and teach you or give some insight into how to behave in a way that makes you more fulfilled in the job you're in. So like I said, rather than looking for that destination that's going to fulfill you, I'm hoping to encourage you to behave in a way that makes you fulfilled where you are today. which hopefully that'll be extremely encouraging, because then instead of feeling like, oh gosh, I have to go find this, you may find, oh, it actually may be closer than I thought. Now, I'll be sharing what that looks like. There are 4 key areas when it comes to career. I probably, if I thought about it too much longer, I'd probably have a lot longer list, but I thought I'd stop at 4 in terms of 4 areas I think people can look at this where I know I do. I'll share some of my own personal stories along this line where you can do this in your career and what it looks like to walk that narrow line. Now, again, is going to be my perspective on it. And there's going to be nuance for everybody, but I think there are some solid guiding principles around each one of these things that I'll be sharing in the 4 areas, which is public brand, job searching, your relationships with your colleagues, and then the work itself. So those will be the 4 I'll be digging into. Now, with this one, I'm going to give a parental advisory right out of the gate, and not parental advisory because I'm going to be cursing or doing anything like that. This is a family-friendly video. But I'm giving the parental advisory to give you a heads up that this is based on a couple assumptions that I won't be getting into in this video. So the first one is, if you have not done the hard work of knowing who you are, figuring out your identity, this will not necessarily work terribly well. Because if you aren't clear on who you are, it's going to be extremely difficult to have someone else or an organization or an environment know who you are. So if you don't know who you are, if you still can't answer that question with a degree of consistency, I'd encourage you to start there. And I still think even if you maybe don't have that totally nailed down, not that I think anybody totally ever nails that down, you will still find value in this, but I think you'll be missing out on some of that stuff. Now, I'm not going to get into I'm not going to spend a lot of time digging into how to figure out your identity and how to drill into that and nail that down. But I may do a future video on that. It's also the topic of my book, Relentless Intention, which I've already written. Now it's just a matter of actually getting it published, but I have a lot of other things to do. But anyway, so I'm not going to get into that in this. Like I said, I may do another video on it, and then keep an eye out for my book. I go into it on that. This also doesn't work, and this is another big caution, if your goal is trying to become someone else based on what you perceive about them. And I see this happen a lot when it comes to career stuff, is we have these people in our lives, and I'd be guilty of it myself over the years, where you have these people in your life, you have this perception of what their career is or what their identity or their life looks like. And so you're trying to build towards that. Ultimately, that is not fulfilling. I can tell you that from personal experience and just research, because you're not them and you don't actually know them. So not only are you not them, so trying to be in their shoes may actually feel extremely uncomfortable. For anybody who's ever put on anybody else's shoes, you know how uncomfortable that can be. But the other thing too is we've got to be really mindful of the fact that often the things we see about people are the highlight reel of their life. And so we're not actually seeing the honesty and vulnerability of what's behind it, especially if we're only encountering them on a surface level. So what may look like fulfillment on the surface might actually be someone who's completely miserable. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen this over the years where people have poured into trying to become someone else only to get to what they think that is and go, this was awful. Like, it was not fulfilling at all, because you're trying to be someone, you're trying to be a version of someone that isn't even the real version of them. And that's not even you. So that's the other caution with this. So if you take this and go, okay, great, now I'm going to go identify this person and apply all these rules to this, it's not going to work. I'll just be straight with you on that. The last one I will give the advisory on is, this does not come without risk. When it comes to being known, and this is a reason a lot of people frequently avoid being known. Being known means people can hurt you. And it means when they hurt you, they can hurt you a lot deeper because they know more about you. They know your inner vulnerabilities. They know the things that can actually wound you in ways that are harder to recover from. So this can be extremely scary. And I myself have wrestled with this over the years of finding that line of, wow, how much do I really want to be known, and having to actually lean into the discomfort of that, because it can be frightening to think about the fact that, man, if people know me, they actually can hurt me. And I don't know how I feel about that risk, which is why you have to do it with wisdom and discernment. The other thing is not only can people hurt you intentionally or unintentionally, but the more people know about you, the more there's the risk they'll dislike you because they actually know things about you. It's pretty hard to dislike something you don't really know anything about. It's also hard to really have a deeper connection with and to actually like something you don't know anything about. But the reverse is true. If you don't really know anything, it's kind of like, I don't really care one way or the other. So some people, by being more known, are going to not like you. And I will tell you from personal experience, I am very open and transparent about things. I've grown in that. That hasn't always been, but I know for a fact there are jobs I have not gotten. There are relationships I have lost. And if you had asked me in the beginning, if I'd known that, would I have continued? Maybe I would have said, ooh, I don't know. But now looking back on it, I can tell you right now that it's all been worth it in the end. So what may be frightening, what may be uncomfortable, this whole idea of being known and, well, maybe people will hurt me or maybe people won't like me if they know who I really am, they are legitimate risks. And I'm not going to pretend that there is no potential negative outcomes of being known. But in the end, my experience has been, and the experience I've seen in others who I've coached, I've worked with, and guided along the way, is it's far more fulfilling. And so do you want to have a career that ultimately is numbing? There's really nothing to it. Or do you want one that, yeah, maybe it comes with a little bit of pain, a little bit of hurt, a little bit of discomfort, but ultimately in the long run is more fulfilling? And if you're watching this video, my guess is it's the latter. But I don't want to gloss over or hide the fact that, yeah, there are things that sometimes don't always go well. And I can say from experience that that hasn't always been easy, and I've had to work through that. So with that, there's the parental advisory. Let's dive in to these 4 different areas of career where being known will add to your career fulfillment, but also how to do that well. So the first one is in your public brand. Now, there are a couple key areas. So for each of these, I'm going to focus on 3 key areas that anybody who's looking at going down this path can focus on, and then talk about how to walk the line and share some experiences. So the first one, when it comes to public brand, that I think is often lacking from people, and then I see them not fulfilled in their public brand, is they don't have a distinct point of view. So you'll see this all the time if you read any social media feed, where you'll see people who are just parroting other people's information or saying generic nonsense that doesn't really mean anything. I see this all the time. And sometimes this is the stuff that fires up the algorithm and flies around. I've seen these quote cards, you go, what even does that mean? You're just saying things. Living is being alive. Like, wow, what a distinct and unique point of view on things. And I would encourage people, being known, again, can it be scary to put yourself out there and say, I've got a point of view on this, and maybe it's somewhat aligned to a typical common group. Maybe it's completely distinct from others, but sharing that distinct point of view that you have is a really important part of being known, so that you don't feel like you're putting forth a version of yourself that isn't really you. Now, the thing with this is, I would say a very important point is to do it with compassion. Where I see this go off the rail, and I guarantee you probably have people that you can think of who you've probably unfollowed or deleted their Facebook because they don't do this with compassion. There is a way to have a distinct point of view, even potentially an unpopular point of view, if you're doing it with compassion. And I think especially in this cultural age, there's this pressure to just go along with whatever's popular for fear of being canceled, fear of somebody blowing up on you. And what my experience has been, because there are lots of things I've shared, there are lots of things where I've shared a point of view or spoken out about something where I had a position on something that maybe went against the common trends or things like that. But I've done it in a way where it's compassionate and empathetic of, I understand that other people have come to other conclusions that I have based on their life experience, based on these other things. And my goal in sharing my point of view is not to beat people over the head and try and drag them into my camp and say, if you don't come over here, you're an idiot or you're a fool for not believing and coming to the same conclusion I have. But instead, sharing it with an understanding and an empathy that this is the conclusion that I've come to, and being open to the fact that others may disagree with you and they may share a point of view. Some of those point of views may evolve your thinking, some may not. And that's okay. And this is where the more we can have these open discourses about things that maybe we would shy away from. I have a lot of conversations with people at work or professionally about things like theology, about politics. And again, having a distinct point of view is not necessarily this powder keg that people often think it is, if you're doing it in a compassionate and understanding and respectful way. And I think that's the important part is, yeah, can you go have a rage post on social media and have it blow up and maybe get, tons of engagement, but you really piss some people off? And I would say, well, is that really what you want to be known for, type of a thing? And is that really who you are? I mean, if it is, I guess then put it out there and then people will really know who you are, and you may have more of a backlash than you realized. But it doesn't mean, the opposite of that does not mean, well, I guess I'm just not going to say anything, or I'm just going to be agreeable on everything. And what's interesting is, for me, sometimes people say, but you tend to have this nuanced approach to things that's very complex. And so it seems like sometimes I may be sitting on the fence. And it's not that I'm sitting on the fence. And if you listen to my content, if you listen to the things I talk about, I often have and this is the conclusion, this is the side of the fence I'm sitting on, while at the same time recognizing there's a lot of nuance and complexity that go into this. And I recognize that other people have come to different conclusions, and I can respectfully engage with them without shutting them down. So I think that's a really important thing, though, is that if you never share a point of view, if you never form a distinct point of view, you will never be known. And the thing with that, though, is that means you actually have to think and reflect and form a point of view on things. And I think that's something that we need more of in our culture right now, is people actually taking the time to concretely form a point of view that's well-rounded, instead of just parroting talking points from whatever tribe they're coming from. But again, this is a critical step to your public brand and being known by others, is being more public about what your points of view are on things, which can be uncomfortable territory. And I will say, over time, I've gotten more confident and I've gotten more comfortable sharing what my distinct point of views are than I did early on. So this is not advice to people to say, okay, go start telling all to people along the ways. And that ties to my next one, which is, it's okay when it comes to your public brand to let people in to your personal life and priorities. And I would actually encourage people to do this. I know historically that has been kind of viewed as taboo a little bit. I think the last few years have really opened up people's recognition that there isn't really a work life and a personal life. There's just life. And these things intersect, and all of these things shape and form us and drive us into who we are. And we need to be more open about that with each other. And here's the thing. Well, I said the last few years have changed the overall public perception of this. My personal experience has been, if you followed me for any extended period of time, you know that I was talking about my personal life, my personal priorities, how they shape and influence my professional life and professional. I was doing that long before the last few years, because to me, I've been a big advocate of having an integrated persona and not compartmentalizing yourself, so that people can, again, know who you are, not know a version of you that you let them into, going into an analogy of a house where you invite someone over, but you only let them into the family room. So they really have no idea what your house is like, but that's the room that they know. Well, they don't really know what your house is like. And that can be scary to let people into that other side, but I've personally found it to be extremely fulfilling. Now, with that level of where you're going to land on what you share and how much you share, I recognize that's going to be different for everyone. I'm not going to lay out a blueprint or an architect document that says this is exactly how everyone should be public with their personal, professional life. Here's the lines that you should draw. And those are going to change over time. As you know, if you follow my content, you'll see that evolution in terms of my transparency across. And there are still things that I don't just, the thing I think sometimes I caution people with is letting people into your personal life and priorities does not mean a tell-all. You just let people know everything you're doing. I've seen people do that, and to me, that's not helpful. And again, finding that line for you, and some of it, I can say from experience, there have been times where I have not drawn that line well and have learned the hard way. But overall, moving trajectorily in that direction of being more open about the lines between my personal and professional life priorities have been extremely fulfilling in that. The other one is really being able to prioritize meeting people individually when it comes to your public brand. I think in the social media age, it can be really easy to try and create these large followings of people. And we have all these, we've got newsletters and we've got social media feeds and we've got public speaking opportunities. And we do this, which are all good things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'd be lying if I said those aren't good things. I've got a Substack, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a LinkedIn following, I've got a lot of different things going. I do a lot of public speaking. Yet, at that same time, if you were to look at my calendar, one of the things I consistently do is make time to prioritize meeting with people individually. So I have virtual coffees scheduled throughout my weeks with people inside and outside my organization to make sure I'm actually connecting on a human level with people, which really helps bring your brand forward. Now, with that, let me just say how you exercise that may look different. For anybody who follows me, you know, the odds of you meeting me in person are rare. I mean, maybe if you're in, you know, my part of Wisconsin, it might work out. And if you followed my LinkedIn, I had a friend who I have known digitally for years come to my house, and it was great. We hung out, had a blast. That's definitely the rarity versus the norm for me. For other people, it's not. I know a lot of folks, someone comes to mind specifically. He's big on conferences. He loves going to conferences and connecting with people individually. And when he's there, he reaches out to all his connections in that location and goes and finds time to make coffee or have coffee with them and things like that. But it's a priority, and it's an important part of finding that fulfillment, because when people know you, you actually can have that sense of community. So those are three things: the having a distinct point of view, letting people into both your personal and professional life, and then making time to actually connect with people on an individual level versus just this top-down push-out model. So with that, let's transition over to what it looks like to being known on the job searching standpoint. Now, this is not just you're out of a job and you're looking for a job, because to me, job searching is something that is an ongoing activity. So let me just say, this is why I included it in this, because otherwise you might go, well, that's only for those times when I'm out of work and I'm looking for my next gig. Not necessarily. In fact, I encourage people to always be in job search mode. And that doesn't mean you're always checked out of your current job looking for the next thing, but you have this active mindset of, I'm here today, but what does my next step look like for me, and how am I actively doing that? So why being known in that is really important. I mean, if you think about it, everybody's been in a job where if you knew what you knew when you got into it, you would have never taken it. And I think that's a really important factor, where a lot of times we have this perception of, I'm only going to show 1% of who I am to just get across the finish line, hopefully land that job. And then you get in only to discover that I'm completely miserable in this. Hang on, I'm going to pause the video for a second, grab my here. Okay, so when it comes to the job searching, here are the three areas of being known that can help move you on the trajectory of finding more career fulfillment. The first one may seem counterintuitive, but it's to apply to jobs even if you're not sure you want them. Now, within reason, let me be clear on this. I'm not saying, I would hate doing this at this company that I absolutely appalls me, but you know what? Hey, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. That is not what I'm talking about. However, let me talk about the flip side, which is where I see most people when it comes to applying to different jobs. And that is the number of people I encounter who wait until the right opportunity comes up to apply. I actually know someone, he's a very good friend of mine, and I still remember a time where he had seen this and he's like, I'm going to waiting for that perfect job and I'll just keep that in my back pocket. And I'm like, that's a very narrow way to think about things. You're not going to find the right opportunity by sitting around waiting for that perfect thing. And again, going back to being known, if you're only exploring what you've already determined is the right thing, how do you really have an opportunity to show who you are and find out what that is, to find where that mutual ground is? Now, let me just say, there may be a lot more opportunity than you realize to meet people. And sometimes even going through the process of learning more about jobs or connecting with people about potential opportunities is an opportunity to connect with other people and be known by those individuals. To give an example of this, and again, when I say there's missed opportunities, let me give you an example where I did this early in my career and it turned out to be a really positive experience. So early in my career, I was broke, absolute broke, like eating ramen, couldn't pay my bills, was doing the alternating, paying your electricity and your cable bill every other month just so they don't shut it off, almost to the point where I had to move into my car type of a thing. So stealing Wi-Fi off a bank, sitting in a parking lot to be able to do anything because I couldn't afford internet. And at that time, I was in a state where I said, okay, I could sit here and try and find the perfect job that caters to what I am keeping secret, but I'm going to try and figure out where that is and where that connection will happen. And instead I said, you know what, I'm going to risk being vulnerable and being known, and I'm going to put myself out there for opportunities that may be outside my comfort zone. But hey, through this process, I'll get to know them, they'll get to know me, and we'll see what happens. And I remember I ended up at this company, and going into it, I went, this is never going to work because I don't want to live in Wallingford, Connecticut. And I don't know anything about healthcare software. And I mean, everything about it was not the right opportunity. Yet I went forward with it and explored it. And it ended up through this process as I got to know the organization, what they were doing, what the role was, as they got to know who I was and my experience and what I brought to the table, it actually ended up being the perfect match. And it was one of those things that had I never been willing to risk being known and getting to know something and had just assessed it from the surface, I never would have gotten there. And so this is a really important thing for a lot of people where maybe they're not feeling completely fulfilled where they are today, or maybe they are, but they just don't know what the future holds. Well, there's nothing wrong with exploring jobs. Even if you don't think you're going to do it, you're not obligated to accept a job, even if you get to the end. I mean, honestly, let's just be honest here. The chances of you applying to a job and getting all the way to offer are so slim that by cutting the funnel off at the top and only applying to things that you have already determined would be the right job, you've basically eliminated any potential for you to actually land a job, which is why I think a lot of times people struggle to find jobs, and it takes losing a job to actually move on to something else because you're forced into a position of, I have to do something. And it finally gets you to open up. Well, why have to wait until you're there? Something else, going back to the being known theme, that will lead to what I see as greater fulfillment in your career is as you're in conversations, as you're talking, whether it's formally in an interview process, whether it's getting to know people from other companies to see what opportunities are there, focus on sharing stories, not data. This is just such a common thing in conversations, especially when it comes to professional stuff. People are just going through a checklist on their resume of like, here's what I did, here's what my job titles were. It's very static, and it really does not give people an opportunity to get to know who you are and what are the things that make you tick and what are the things that bring you joy versus what are the things that you go, I've done this, but it didn't really go this way. Or actually sharing stories of how things went, because that may help someone see how you may or may not fit into a culture. Going back to what I said before on the parental advisory, there may be times that being known in this process may result in you not getting a job. And that may sound terrifying, but it actually would be dodging a bullet. I think of a time where I was applying for a job and I was in the interview process. And through the course of the conversation with the hiring manager, I was sharing stories about some of the encounters I'd had at previous jobs and how they went and how I handled them. And ultimately, I didn't get the job. And I talked to the hiring manager about it, and come to find out, they just had said, you would not fit well here. But that hiring manager then connected me with someone else, because he said, but as I got to know you, I actually think this would be a better fit for you. And so I actually ended up in a better job, even though on the surface it seemed like, well, but you didn't get the job you were applying for. Correct. And that actually being the best thing. Now, as the caution, when it comes to sharing stories and skills, one of the things that I think can send you down the wrong pathway is that walking the narrow line. Sharing stories is not about bragging. It's not about telling everybody how amazing you are and how wonderful you are at everything. It's about sharing how you've engaged with others, how you like to solve problems. It's about how you connect with the work that you do. And I think that's a really important thing to consider as you do this, because I've heard people go, okay, well, I'm going to share more about myself. And it turns into a dissertation on why I'm the most awesome person in the world, which that's not going to get. I mean, I guess it is sharing a little bit of who you are. And if that truly is how you think about yourself, then by all means, go ahead and do it. And at least then people will know, well, this person's a complete narcissistic blowhard. But at least then they'll know that about you. But my general experience has been that is not how most people are. And so when you represent yourself that way, it's actually a misrepresentation. You're being known, but you're being known for something that's not you. The other thing on this, though, is I would caution people about only doing this with their boss. To be fair, I think more people need to have these conversations with their boss, but I see this too limited in terms of in a lot of career advice when it comes to being known. People assume that their boss is the key connector for their career. And honestly, I can just say as a hiring manager, I am sometimes very limited in terms of what I can connect people with. It might, as I've grown in my career, as I've built my network, a lot of times I have more access to things than some people do, but a lot of managers don't. And even myself, who I would consider pretty hyper connected, even for me, sometimes there's people who come to me and go, hey, can you help with this? Or this is what I'm looking to do. And I go, no. I mean, I can keep my eyes out. I might be able to help make some connections, but ultimately I don't have a whole lot to go on. And so being known is about not just being known to your boss. It's about building those relationships and sharing the skills and the stories you have with others. However, not however, the final thought on this one, though, is as you're engaging with people, ask questions. And to be fair, I will say what kind of questions you may ask will depend on where you are in the process and who you're engaging with. So when it comes to being known, it's also about understanding other things, and asking questions a lot of times opens up dialogue to, one, allow you to tell better stories, but also to be able to discover and uncover different things about what you're potentially getting into. So when it comes to this, let me give a good example of where I see this go south. Okay. I've known some people over the years who are big advocates of wanting a remote job. And I've been there. Actually, I'll share a personal story. Okay. I worked remotely for a good chunk of time early in my career. And when we had our first kid, I decided I only want to consider jobs that are fully remote. And as a result, I thought, well, that's who I am. So I want to be known. And so I'm going to be known and I'm going to be bold. And in the very early stages of the interview process, I'm just going to come straight out with that. And if it doesn't go over well, then it wasn't the right job for me. And so as I was exploring jobs in the very first interview, screener interview with, whoever it was, I would just straight up put out there, so does this job allow me to work remotely? And again, asking questions can be a way to be known, because the questions you ask tell a lot about somebody. And I remember I finally changed my approach, because I quickly learned, okay, they don't know anything about me. And here I am making a pretty big assertion going, you're going to need to allow me to work remotely. And while I wasn't directly asking, can I work remotely? That's essentially what I was asking by asking the question, would this position be allowed to be 100% remote in the very first interview? Often talking with someone who has zero, work relationship with the person who's actually going to be running the job. And so HR was literally screening me out of things. So that's where I say you need to be careful how you're asking questions and how known you're being based on different stages in the process of how you're searching. But I think one of the mistakes I see people often make is they're afraid to get into this because they're afraid of losing something. And so they just go along, they're agreeable. They, don't ask the deeper questions to validate this stuff, and they hope that they can just figure it out on the other side. And that can land you in a position where you end up having to do a lot more work or finding yourself a lot less fulfilled because you ended up putting yourself in a situation you could have avoided in the first place had you just asked the right questions. So that's, again, walking that delicate line as you're looking for new opportunities, whether formally because you're looking for your next job or you're just expanding your horizons and seeing what does the future look like for me. Okay, so on to number 3, which is relationships you have with your colleagues, the professional colleagues that you have, and how can you work on being known and building meaningful relationships with people that really are professional. And I will say, let me be clear, the line on this is going to be different for everybody. I have always kind of, depending on the environment, walked between sometimes I don't really want to be friends with my work colleagues, and other times I do. And so I don't think there's this clear, this is what relationships with your colleagues should look like. However, being known by your colleagues, regardless of whether you end up being friends or not, is going to lead to a more fulfilling career. So as we think about 3 things I think anyone can do to go deeper in being known with your professional colleagues. The first one is to think about the relationships you have with your colleagues as far more than a transaction. This to me is one of the greatest opportunity areas I see in people. Is so often people treat relationships just as this transaction. Like, I'm just making a connection and I'm only reconnecting with people when I need something from them, or they're only connecting with me when they need something from me. And making it a priority to connect with people is a really key skill. And that goes back to, I mentioned it earlier in the public brand, like, how are you actually doing this? But what's really interesting is I see this happen a lot because I do this. I set up regular, like I said, I set up regular virtual coffees, not only with people outside my 4 walls, but internally. And sometimes when I first start this, people sometimes raise their eyebrows and go, well, what are we going to talk about? Do you have an agenda item? And sometimes my answer is no. Sometimes we might. Sometimes my goal is just to get to know you more on an individual level. And that can be uncomfortable for people at first. But as you lean into it, people become very comfortable with it. And it's really interesting how over the years I've seen this, where if you have Outlook, you may be familiar with how sometimes recurring appointments fall off. And the number of people who will reach out when that happens and go, I've noticed we haven't had our virtual coffee recently, and I thought it'd just be good for us to catch up. People realize, they feel that, they sense that, which again, in the beginning can feel a little uncomfortable. But if you're the one to lean into that and say, you know what, maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but I'll figure out how to work through that so that we can start to build on a connecting level, it becomes very familiar to people. And it's extremely helpful, not only just in getting things done professionally, but also it gives you a sense of connection in the environment that you're in. Now, one caution to folks, and this is where sometimes people mistake my personality as I'm opposed to in-office environments. I'm actually not. I've worked in offices. I thought it was great when I did it in the seasons that it worked for me. I'm in a season now where that does not appeal to me whatsoever, but I know it does appeal to some folks. But the caution I would give to people is, don't assume that just because you're in an office that you are building strong, meaningful relationships with your colleagues. You can have just as shallow, unfulfilling relationships and be just as unknown by your colleagues, despite the fact you maybe see them, encounter them all the time. And don't assume that just because you're in an office, that's happening. Going back to it, this is where I said before in the job searching, it's not just about when you're looking for your new opportunity, but as you're encountering and engaging with other people that you're working with, do get to know and share. What are your skills? What are your visions for the future? You never know who that person is who may get to know you, who may actually end up having a connection point that you would have never expected. I think of a time I actually got referred to for one of the coolest jobs I ever got by someone that I would have never in my wildest dreams imagined had a connection. This person was not in my field, was not in my industry, had zero connections to the company. But as I was talking about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, this individual goes, you know what? I actually know this hiring manager that's in this company that's actually looking for somebody like this. Are you interested in me making that connection? And it ended up being an amazing career move for me. And it was all because this person knew me. And so again, going back to something I said earlier, it's not about bragging about yourself, telling everybody how wonderful and amazing you are, but as you build relationships with your colleagues, it's part of being known. It's part of sharing who you are and what matters to you. And not only may it benefit you from a professional standpoint, you may find those other connection points on a personal level where, again, I don't have a ton of work people who I would consider personal friends, but have there been seasons and have some work friends become personal friends over time? Yes. And it was largely because we knew things about each other that led to us having a deeper, more meaningful connection that grew into a friendship. And that's not going to happen if you're not being known. And I think that's a really important part where we tend to be really guarded, and then we wonder why we don't have any meaningful connections. And it's because we won't let people in, which, by the way, that's not something that comes easy for me or has not come easy for me. The other thing when it comes to relationships at work and how to walk that line of being known, it's really important that you ask questions about others, but I would encourage people to be the one who leads with vulnerability. And that, again, what that looks like and how comfortable you are and who you're doing this with is going to vary for everyone. But the best step that I can give to people is to lead with vulnerability as you're asking for questions or as you ask your questions. And the reason I say that is I've seen people and have been the person who's made this mistake where I've asked people to be vulnerable before I was vulnerable. And that can be very off-putting to folks. And you actually may create distance between you and the people that you're trying to get to know, because it can almost seem like, wait, you want me to share with you who I am, but you're not sharing with me. And so as you think about this, you're going to have to figure out where that line is for you of what comfort level you have with being honest and vulnerable. But time and time again for myself, is what I've found is the more open and honest and vulnerable I am with people, the more people reciprocate that back. And when I'm willing to let people into some of the things I'm struggling with, or what I'm able to let people into what's going on in my life and what's distracting me, the more they're willing to open up and share that with me. But I have to be willing to ask. And that goes back to, if this is I just want to talk about me, you're never going to get there. But I think what can happen is you ask questions, really making it about them, you find those opportunities to respond with vulnerability that then encourages more of that mutual getting to know each other. And, you're going to run, this is not perfect. You're going to find resistance. It takes time. You're playing the long game with this. This isn't about it, but just even simple things can make a big difference. When you ask people how things are going and they say, yeah, good. And you can read it. I mean, this is, again, pay attention. People are terrible listeners in general. Be a good listener, because you can see sometimes when somebody says they're fine, but you can tell they're really not fine. And then being willing to ask follow-up questions about, are you sure? Are you sure you're fine? And if you really still are finding that resistance, be respectful. It's not about bashing through that, but that may be an opportunity for you to go, I'm going to lead with some vulnerability in this, because I can sense there's something going on there, but they aren't comfortable sharing that with me. So I can open that door by sharing a struggle that I'm going through. So just as an example of this, I had something recently where I could tell something was going on. It was a person that I was getting to know through one of my kind of interactions, and I could tell something was up. And so they were, I'd asked how they were doing, how things were going, and, good, fine, but you could tell it wasn't. And I pressed a little bit and could tell it wasn't a conversation they were comfortable having in that moment. So I used that as an opportunity to share something that I was going through in that moment, and kind of tied to, well, I'm glad things are going well with you. I personally have been, dealing with this, and I shared some health stuff that I was going through with them. Not crazy details. Again, you're going to make mistakes along the way. And I think over time, I've learned how to walk that line. But what happened was, as I shared that I wasn't okay and I was struggling with some things, that individual then opened up after I did that. And this was a good example of what I'm talking about here, where you ask about them, but then find opportunities to be vulnerable, to extend that branch of, it's okay for us to be vulnerable with each other. And again, is it risky? Sure. Could somebody use that to hurt you? Maybe, but is it worth it in the end? I would say absolutely. Okay. So the last one is related to the work itself. So what are ways that you can be known in the work that you're doing, in the actual work, not the relationships, but in the work itself? And a couple things that I think can be really helpful for people when it comes to work is, first of all, one, to seek out opportunities and not wait for opportunities to come to them. And this was something for me early in my career that took me some time to get the hang of. I always wanted, and who doesn't? Who doesn't want to be noticed by someone and tapped on the shoulder? I guess that's the term that's used all the time in corporate. Like, who doesn't want that? Somebody who just sees you for who you are and says, I really want, that, or I want to help that person get. Everybody wants that. I get it. We want to be noticed and recognized and appreciated. But my word of caution is, in general, nobody's coming for you. And that's a hard message to hear, but largely people are distracted with their own stuff, their own priorities. They're distracted with other things. And especially if you're sitting back waiting for somebody to see what you have to offer to then reach out and do that, you're going to be waiting a long time. And there's opportunity to get in front of that and say, you know what, I'm not going to wait. And that doesn't mean that it'll never happen. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't still want to be recognized and appreciated and noticed. I'm not saying don't completely disregard those things, but I'm saying don't wait on that to happen for you to seek out opportunity. Now, the cautionary line with that. So let me give an example of this. Okay. There were some opportunities in an organization I was with that were outside my function, outside my lane, but I knew what was going on through, again, going back to the relationship building that I do. I knew about some things that were happening, and I had asked, hey, can you connect me to this group? I have some thoughts on how we may be able to actually sort this out. And I ended up getting connected in, and I leaned into it, and I ended up, I didn't even formally move the job, but I built these really strong relationships outside of the function that gave me a ton of fulfillment in the role. And when the project was over, I went back to, whatever it was, but it ultimately led to a job move later on. I ended up moving about a year later because an opportunity opened up and that person remembered who I was and how I had worked with them. And I was known through that work that then led to a formal job change. And again, sometimes it's about recognizing you're playing the long game here. Not everything has an immediate return. The caution I would give to people, though, two cautions on this one, because this can be really dangerous territory for folks, is one, you can be so set on pursuing what's next, you can overstretch yourself. You can end up, and I hate, companies sometimes will play on this. I'll just tell you right now, companies will at times take advantage of this where they'll go, hey, stretch assignments. Let's give people stretch assignments, which sometimes can be code for, can we give this person 2 jobs, but only pay them for 1? And so you need to be mindful and careful of this, that there are people that will take advantage of this. And you have to be able to draw that line of, when am I going too far? When am I giving too much of myself versus, recognizing the value that I bring and actually drawing that line clearly? So you need to be careful of that. I think the other thing is you need to make sure you're doing your job. I've seen people, this one I don't know that I've ever done myself, but I have known people and encountered people where they're so busy trying to do the other thing that they really want to do, they're actually falling behind in their job, and they don't realize that that's reflecting on their performance. And ultimately their boss is the one that's going to be engaging with this person. And now their boss is going to go, well, this person doesn't really, is a poor performer, because to them they were. And so you just got to be really careful when it comes to this, but figure out what your level of capacity is and find out, hey, where are those opportunities that I can lean into, that I can seek out outside of things? And I'm not going to wait for somebody to tap me and go, you are just amazing. Here's this amazing opportunity I custom thought of for you. The other thing is, it doesn't have to be a new job. And the example I gave of when I did this, initially, it wasn't a new job. Upward mobility and even lateral mobility is not the only option when it comes to being known and having career fulfillment. You may love your boss and love where you sit, and maybe that's where you want to stay. You just want to have other opportunities to go do other things and not necessarily be 100% focused only on the one activity in your organization. And that is a growing trend, and things that just as an HR exec, I see companies starting to recognize is that internal gig project type thing is growing. And there is a greater recognition that, well, maybe this person's really well situated in this team and 80% of their time really is well suited for this, but 20, 30% of their time actually does make sense over here. And that's okay. Now, granted, it takes a strong manager who understands how to manage that well. It takes an organizational culture that does it. But don't limit yourself into thinking that the only way you're going to find fulfillment is by landing another job. There are much more creative ways that you can be known and be appreciated and be valued without necessarily having to go get another job. And, that's the other thing is, like, there's just ways that you can do that by leveraging the relationships that you build and that you maintain through this. So just be careful of that. Because I also encourage the number of people I encourage to, well, this kind of ties to the third point. So let me tie it to the third point here, which is getting outside of your company walls. So I just talked about how you may be able to seek out opportunities in your organization, cross-functional teams. Yeah, maybe you do want to get promoted. Maybe you don't really care about that, and that's okay. Maybe you just want to explore other opportunities or spend more of your time split across different things. That is certainly something that can happen. And the other point that I forgot to mention with that is ask. That's one of the things that a lot of times I will just tell you as a hiring manager, I am very sensitive to asking people to do other things that are outside their scope. And so there are lots of times where I see opportunity for people, but I don't want to be the one to go, hey, you should do this, because I don't want to put that pressure on them. Versus if you see something, be the one to raise your hand and say, I'd like to do this, because what it does is it signals to the leaders, to the managers that, hey, this is a person who wants to do it. We're not forcing it on them. But what I was going to say on the last point is think outside your company walls. This is, to me, one of the biggest missed opportunities. And I get it. I've been there where I've been so heads down in my organization, in the priorities that I have lost sight of that. I would say probably 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 7, 8 years ago is when I really started recognizing, maybe a little more, maybe 10, maybe about 10 years ago is when I recognized I need to be intentional about staying connected outside of my company. And going back to the opportunity may not be a new job. Maybe it's a side hustle. I know that this sometimes is a taboo topic, but I've talked to numbers of people that I've coached where I've said, listen, maybe you are happy with your job. Maybe you are fulfilled in the job and the team you're on. You just have some extra capacity you'd like to put something to. Who says you have to do that within your company? Start a blog, start a podcast, start a, whatever. I mean, there's lots of different things. I had somebody I knew, they set up a small business selling, I don't remember what it was, but They just crafted things. Oh yeah, they had a woodworking thing. They loved doing woodworking. And we worked together to build a plan for them to do that on the side in the evenings, on the weekends, when they had free time. And it just helped them feel more fulfilled without necessarily having to go get a different job or quit or move on from their current role. And I just would encourage people to think about that when it comes to being known, is that this can expand the possibilities of how you think about it. And these are ways that you can be known and find a more fulfilling career without necessarily taking just the standard trajectory of, okay, well, that means it looks like this. And I think it can give you a more well-rounded professional career that you are actually more satisfied in. So I'm going to wrap it up here with this. And hopefully, as you think about your work, your relationships, as you're looking for your next opportunity, and also with your brand, there are ways that you can walk this line of being known. And time again, the more I find, as people get this right, as people walk this line well, they are far more fulfilled in their career than people who aren't, which you've heard my cautions on this. It does not come without risk, but the risk, in my opinion, has always been worth the reward. Now, a couple concluding thoughts in what to do with this. So if you watch the whole thing, if you've seen all this, it's a lot of stuff. I covered a lot of stuff in an hour, which didn't know if I would get through it in an hour. But anyway, that's a lot of things, and that can be overwhelming. So here's kind of a process that I would encourage anybody who watches through this to think about as you go forward. And the first is this: assess where you are on this. Now, I just gave you 12 areas that you could potentially focus. So 4 key sections, 3 different areas within each of those sections you could focus on in terms of being known more and leading to that greater fulfillment. Nobody can take on 12 things and do it successfully. So as you think back at some of the things I've shared, assess, where are you doing this really well today? And then where are the areas that you go, oh, wow, yeah, like listening to that, I'm actually terrible at doing that. I do not do that at all, or I'd never consider those things. Be honest about that. And it's okay, because guess what? I don't know anybody who's nailing all of these. I've been working on this for well over almost 2 decades, and I still don't have it down pat. And I continue evolving and iterating. So first is just objectively assess where you are. From there, prioritize it. Don't try and do everything. Like I said, if you try and do all 12 of those, you will not do any of them well, and you'll fail, and you'll be frustrated and feel like this didn't accomplish what I was hoping to accomplish. So take the time to assess, then prioritize, maybe pick 2 or 3. Are there 2 or 3 areas that I hit on in here where you go, I could do that. Maybe I could work on getting better at this, because what'll happen from a standpoint, how this typically works out, or at least how it has for me, is I will identify 2 to 3 things that I want to improve or change. And then I will work on them till they get to what I would consider a state of stability, where they're basically on cruise control. And it's about getting to a point where I go, they're at the level that I want them to be at. Now they just run automatically. So then I can focus on 2 to 3 more. And that doesn't mean you just let them go to the wayside. It just means I don't need to keep, like, working those muscles is just now part of my routine. It doesn't feel like additional work. It just happens. So to give an example of this, it's not hard for me to share more publicly on social media what's going on in my life. I don't think about it. It's just the way I do it. So that allows me then to focus more on, okay, where do I need to focus more of my energy or more of my time, which for me right now is figuring out how to consolidate and hone in on some of the activities I'm doing, because I started a bunch of different things and now things have changed and evolved for me. And so I'm actually getting rid of some things so that I can focus on some other ones. So again, that goes back to prioritize. Figure out those things that you're going to move and focus on and put them into steady state. But the last one, and the most important one, is actually act. Actually do things. I talk a lot about learning and what it means to develop and grow professionally and personally. And one of the biggest opportunity areas I see in our industry, just professionally as a whole, we do a lot of passive knowledge acquisition, passive consumption of information, where we go, I'm learning things, I'm figuring things out. You might watch this video and go, I picked up a few things, but if you don't do something with it, nothing's going to change. So make sure you're actually taking the time and putting the energy into doing something, and try it. You will probably fail. No, not you probably. You will fail on some of these things. They will not go well. The number of everything I described in here, I could list off multiple times where I've done it, and it's just been an absolute colossal failure. But I didn't quit. I reflected on what happened. I got feedback, and then I adapted it. And even when it worked well, I still reflect on, well, what about that went well? And then I get feedback on why. And there have been times where what I thought was the reason it went well actually wasn't the reason I went well. And that reflection and the feedback helped me go, oh, okay, that worked well, but not for the reason I thought. So the way I'm going to adapt it is to focus on this other area. But ultimately, my main point in that is make sure you're actually acting, because if you're not acting, you're not going to get anywhere. My final and concluding thought on this, and then I'm going to wrap it up, or well, I am wrapping it up, then I'm just going to close it out, is while you may have come, well, not may have, you came to this video because the idea of a fulfilling career is something that's important to you. And it is. It's a great thing. I can say from my experience, I am extremely fulfilled in the career that I have. I enjoy it thoroughly, and have worked very hard to get where I am and really enjoy it. At the same time, don't lose sight of the fact that your career will not be there for you in the end. And if anything, that's why, to me, the advice I give in here about being known is actually serving two purposes. One, it will make your career more fulfilling, but it's also helping you be known and build those interpersonal relationships that are going to sustain your career. Because the reality is your career is not going to be there for you in the end. So you need to prioritize accordingly. And what I hope that you see through this is, by doing some of these activities, one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is try to figure out, where can I act once and have multiple impacts? And all the things I shared with you here can actually have multiple impacts. Yes, they will grow your career. They will help your career move in a positive direction, while at the same time building the community and the support network that you need that will live on past whatever job you're in today. You know, your careers come and go, but people don't. So with that, I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your week or day or whatever it is that you are going through as you watch this, and we will see you on the other side.